The streets of New York were buzzing with the usual hustle and bustle. Tourists snapping pictures of skyscrapers, office workers rushing to their next meetings, and street vendors calling out their wares. It was a day like any other, yet something extraordinary was about to happen. Donald Trump, the former president and real estate mogul, strolled down Fifth Avenue, his eyes hidden behind a pair of dark sunglasses. His well-tailored suit seemed to stand out even in the busy crowd, exuding the kind of confidence that only a man who has built an empire could possess. He had just finished a meeting with his team and was looking forward to a brief walk to clear his mind. As he walked, people around him took notice. Some nodded respectfully, while others whispered to one another about the infamous billionaire. It wasn't unusual for Trump to be in public, but today, something was different. Out of nowhere, a voice broke through the noise of the crowd. "Hey, mister, can you spare $1?" Trump turned, momentarily startled. Standing on the sidewalk, his clothes ragged and his face weathered by time, was a homeless man. His name was Jack, and though his appearance seemed ordinary, his eyes held a story, one of loss, hardship, and dreams that had long since been shattered. The man repeated his request. "Just $1, sir. Please." For a split second, Trump hesitated. He had seen people like Jack countless times before, men and women begging for change, trying to get by in a city that never seemed to stop. Normally, he would simply move on, not bothering to stop. But today, something about the look in Jack's eyes caught him off guard. The crowd around them began to take notice. Some people muttered under their breath, expecting Trump to dismiss the man with a quick no. Others were waiting for a grand gesture, some show of charity or disdain that could make headlines. Trump, however, did something no one expected. Without saying a word, he motioned for Jack to follow him. The two of them began walking side by side down the sidewalk, as the curious onlookers watched in disbelief. "Where are we going?" Jack asked, cautiously. Trump didn't look at him at first. Instead, he glanced ahead, as if contemplating something. Finally, he answered, "Let's get some coffee. I'm tired of the usual crowd." The decision to walk away from the bustling street and into the quiet of a nearby cafe stunned everyone who had been watching. Some even took out their phones, ready to document what could be the start of a viral moment. But what Trump did next was far more shocking than anyone could have imagined. What do you think Trump will do next? Why do you think he made this decision? Share your thoughts in the comments below. As Trump and Jack entered the quiet cafe, the contrast between the chaos of the street and the peaceful atmosphere inside was striking. The barista, a young woman with a skeptical look, barely raised an eyebrow when Trump walked in. He was, after all, a regular in the city's elite spots. But today, he wasn't with his usual entourage. He was with Jack, the homeless man who had just asked him for $1. They took a seat at a small table by the window, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was heavy with unspoken questions, as if both were trying to figure out the reason for this unexpected encounter. Jack nervously fidgeted with his sleeves, unsure of how to act in such an unfamiliar setting. Trump broke the silence. "Tell me your story, Jack," he said, leaning back in his chair, his eyes now softer, less guarded. "How did you end up like this?" Jack looked up, surprised by the question. Most people would just throw him some spare change and move on. But Trump was different. He was actually asking, genuinely curious. Taking a deep breath, Jack began. "I used to have everything," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "A business, a home, a family. I was living the American dream, or at least I thought I was." Trump listened intently, his fingers tapping the table as Jack spoke. "I invested in some bad deals, made some wrong choices, and, well, here I am now," Jack continued, his eyes downcast. "One bad decision after another, and I lost it all. My wife left, my kids won't speak to me, and I ended up on the streets." Trump's expression softened further. He had always believed in hard work, in making your own way. But he also knew that sometimes, life could throw curveballs that no amount of money or power could fix. "I didn't start out like this," Jack added, almost as if he were trying to justify his situation. "I was like you once. I had ambition. I had a vision. But now," he trailed off, his voice breaking, "now, I'm just trying to survive. For a brief moment, the room seemed to fade away. The only sounds the quiet hum of conversation and the clink of coffee cups. Trump's gaze fixed on Jack, and the businessman within him began to think. Jack's story wasn't unfamiliar. It reminded him of countless others who had made their way into the business world with dreams of success, only to face crushing defeats. But what was different this time was the personal connection he felt, something he hadn't expected to encounter today. "Do you want to get back on your feet?" Trump asked suddenly, his voice serious. Jack looked up, confusion and hope flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Trump leaned forward. "I'm not going to give you just $1. That's not going to change your life. But I can give you a job, a real chance. I don't know what you used to do, but I'm sure there's something in you that can be useful." Jack blinked, stunned. This was more than he had ever expected. He had imagined a quick handout, maybe a meal, but this was something else entirely. "But why me?" Jack stammered. "I'm just a guy who made some bad choices." Trump shrugged, a slight smirk crossing his face. "We all make mistakes. The key is what you do afterward." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their coffees, but it didn't break the mood. Jack sat there, still processing what Trump had just offered. A chance, a real shot at redemption. For the first time in a long while, Jack felt a flicker of hope. What do you think of Trump's decision to offer Jack a job? Do you think he's being genuine, or is there another motive behind his actions? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Jack sat quietly for a moment, the coffee cup in front of him untouched. His mind was racing, still processing the unexpected offer from Donald Trump. It felt like a dream, a chance, but it also felt too good to be true. Could a man like Trump really help someone like him? Trump didn't push him. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and waited, giving Jack the space to think. It wasn't like him to offer second chances to just anyone, especially not after hearing Jack's story. But something about Jack had struck a chord with him. Maybe it was his honesty, his rawness. Or maybe it was the fact that Jack had once stood where Trump had been, at the top. Jack cleared his throat and finally spoke. "I don't know where to begin," he muttered, his voice tinged with regret. "I guess you could say I had everything once, just like you." Trump nodded, as if inviting him to continue. Jack took a deep breath and leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "I grew up in a small town in Ohio," Jack began. "Nothing special, really. My parents were middle-class folks who worked hard. My dad was a mechanic, my mom was a nurse. But they always taught me the value of a good education, and they pushed me to dream big." Jack's eyes wandered out the window, as if seeing a different time. A time before the fall. "I did well in school. Graduated college with honors. Went into business, finance, real estate. That's where I made my name. Everything was going great for a while. I made smart investments. The money started rolling in." Trump could relate. The world of business, the excitement of building an empire, the thrill of the deal. He had seen it all. "But you know how it goes," Jack continued, his voice growing more somber. "You start making money, and you think you can't lose. You take more risks, more chances. The big deals, the glamorous parties, the people who start flocking to you. They tell you you're the next big thing." Jack paused, staring down at his coffee, almost as if the memory itself was too painful to relive. Trump remained silent, his expression thoughtful. "I got greedy," Jack admitted. "I thought I could do it all. I put all my money into a massive project, a luxury development. It was going to be huge. It was going to be my crowning achievement." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes now focused on the ground, a look of disbelief still etched across his face. But it all fell apart. Construction delays, the economy tanked, investors pulled out. I was left holding the bag. The bank foreclosed on my property, and I was bankrupt. My wife left me soon after, taking the kids with her. And just like that, everything I had worked for was gone. Trump listened intently. The rise and fall of Jack's story wasn't foreign to him. He had seen it all in his own career. The people who made it big, only to lose it all because they weren't prepared for the inevitable crash. And yet, he still believed in second chances. Jack's story wasn't over yet, not in Trump's eyes. Jack continued, his voice becoming more strained. I tried to pick myself up. I got a few smaller jobs, but nothing stuck. And eventually, I ended up on the streets. I've been living in shelters, picking up odd jobs here and there, just trying to survive." He looked directly at Trump now, a mixture of shame and defiance in his eyes. "I know I screwed up. I know I should have played it smarter, but I didn't. And now, I'm just trying to get by. And sometimes, asking for $1 feels like the only way to keep going." Trump studied Jack for a long moment, considering his words carefully. He had heard hundreds of similar stories in his life. People who had fallen from grace, people who had hit rock bottom. But there was something different about Jack. He wasn't making excuses. He wasn't asking for sympathy. He was just being honest. "I get it," Trump finally said, breaking the silence. "Life can hit you hard. But it's not about how many times you fall. It's about how you get back up." Jack blinked, surprised by the directness of Trump's words. He had expected the usual platitudes, the pull yourself together speeches that people often gave to the homeless. But this was different. Trump was looking at him as if he were just another man who had fallen, not a lost cause. "I don't know if I'm ready to get back up," Jack said quietly. "I don't know if I can." Trump smiled, though there was no arrogance in it, just a kind of quiet understanding. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. "That's why I'm offering you this chance. Not as charity, as a partnership." Jack looked confused, but Trump continued. "You said you used to be in real estate, right? You understand how the game works." Trump leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with the same entrepreneurial fire that had driven him his entire career. "I need someone who knows the ropes, someone who can handle the grind, someone who isn't afraid to get their hands dirty. And I think you can do that. You just need the right push. And I can give you that." The weight of Trump's words hung in the air. Jack was stunned, unsure whether to believe what he was hearing. Was this a test? A joke? Or was Trump really offering him a second chance? "Are you serious?" Jack finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Trump nodded. "I'm serious. I don't offer second chances to just anyone. But I think you've got the potential to turn it around. I've seen it before, and I think I can help you do it again." Jack sat in silence for a moment, trying to absorb everything that had been said. Was this real? Could this really be the break he had been waiting for? He looked at Trump, then down at his coffee, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't done. "Do you think Jack should take Trump up on his offer? Do you think someone who has lost everything can really make a comeback?" Share your thoughts in the comments below. The days that followed Jack's meeting with Donald Trump felt like a blur. What had started as a simple request for $1 had turned into something entirely unexpected, a chance at a new life. Jack couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time he closed his eyes, he replayed the conversation, his mind racing with possibilities. Could he really start over? Was it even possible to reclaim what he had lost? For the first time in years, Jack felt like he had a shot. He had always believed that people could change, that second chances were real, but he never thought he would be the one given one. The more he thought about Trump's offer, the more he realized it wasn't just a job. It was a lifeline. But was he ready for it? Jack didn't have the answers. After their meeting, Trump had arranged for Jack to stay at a modest apartment in one of his buildings, far from the luxurious penthouses that Trump himself owned, but comfortable enough for someone who had spent the last few years on the streets. The apartment wasn't much, but to Jack, it was a symbol of hope. It was his first step away from homelessness. It was his first step toward redemption. The first few days were overwhelming. Jack was used to waking up in a cramped shelter, the sound of others' voices filling the air, the constant shuffle of people coming and going. But now, he had silence. He had his own space, his own bed. He didn't have to fight for food or find a place to sleep. For the first time in a long while, he had peace. Still, doubt lingered. Could he really change? Could he really live up to Trump's faith in him? The following week, Trump called Jack and asked him to meet at one of his office buildings. The meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp, and Jack spent the night before preparing. He had nothing fancy to wear, but he made sure his clothes were clean and pressed. He couldn't afford a suit, but he did his best to look the part. When he arrived at the office, Trump was waiting for him in a sleek conference room. The space was just as imposing as Trump himself. Glass walls, modern furniture, and the unmistakable aura of success. Trump stood up when Jack entered, his expression serious, but not unkind. "Glad you could make it, Jack," Trump said, shaking his hand firmly. "I want to see what you're made of." Jack nodded, swallowing his nervousness. He didn't want to let Trump down, not after everything he had done for him. "Have a seat." Trump gestured to the chair across from him. "Let's get down to business." The meeting began with a brief rundown of the real estate projects Trump was overseeing, high-end developments, luxury condos, and new ventures he was considering. Jack was both fascinated and intimidated by the scope of it all. But Trump didn't just throw him into the deep end. Instead, he gave him small tasks. Simple ones, to begin with: research properties, make phone calls, keep track of paperwork. The work was basic, but it was a start. It was more than Jack had ever hoped for. For the next few weeks, Jack threw himself into the work. He made phone calls, drafted emails, and began learning the ins and outs of the real estate business all over again. He was slow at first, making mistakes here and there, but Trump was patient with him. Every time Jack stumbled, Trump offered a quick word of encouragement. And little by little, Jack began to get the hang of it. One afternoon, about a month into his new routine, Trump called Jack into his office again. "I've been watching you, Jack," Trump said, leaning back in his chair, his fingers steepled together in front of him. "And I have to say, I'm impressed. You've got potential, but potential alone isn't enough. You need to show me you're ready for the next step." Jack sat up straighter. "What's the next step?" Trump stood up and walked over to a large whiteboard. He scribbled down a few numbers and words, then turned to face Jack. "I need someone to handle a new project I'm working on. It's a risky venture, but if it works, it'll pay off big time. I want you to take the lead on this." Jack's heart pounded in his chest. "You want me to lead a project?" He couldn't believe what he was hearing. "But I don't know if I'm ready for something like that." Trump smiled, the hint of a challenge in his eyes. "You won't know if you're ready unless you try. You've been working hard, and you've learned a lot. This is your chance to prove it. If you fail, we'll learn from it. If you succeed, you'll have earned your place here." Jack was silent for a moment. The weight of the decision hung heavy on his shoulders. This was a huge leap, and the stakes were high. But deep down, he knew that this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. The opportunity to prove to himself that he could succeed, even after everything he had lost. "Okay," Jack finally said, his voice steady. "I'll do it." Trump nodded, his expression showing approval. "Good. I knew you had it in you." As Jack walked out of the office that day, his mind was racing. He had just been handed the kind of opportunity most people only dream of, but with it came pressure. The pressure to perform, the pressure to succeed, and the pressure to prove that he deserved this chance. But for the first time in a long while, Jack felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Do you think Jack is ready to take on this new challenge? What do you think will happen next? Will he succeed or fail? Share your thoughts below. Jack spent the following days submerged in work. The offer to lead a new real estate project was both exhilarating and terrifying. There were moments when doubt crept in, and he couldn't help but wonder if he was out of his depth. But there was something else too: a deep, burning desire to prove himself, not just to Trump, but to everyone who had ever doubted him. The project Trump had assigned him was a risky but promising one. A mixed-use development in the heart of Manhattan. The building would include both luxury apartments and commercial space, aimed at attracting young professionals and high-end businesses. If it succeeded, it would be a major boost to Trump's portfolio and, more importantly, Jack's career. Jack had a lot of catching up to do. He had spent so many years living in survival mode that he had neglected to keep up with the ever-evolving world of real estate. But he wasn't about to let that stop him. He dove headfirst into the numbers, studying market trends, comparing property values, and scrutinizing every detail of the site. Late one night, Jack sat at his desk, going over the figures one last time. The project's budget was tight, and the timeline was even tighter. But if he could pull it off, it would be the breakthrough he needed. His phone buzzed. It was a message from Trump. "How's the project going? Let me know if you need anything. But make sure you're not overthinking it. Get it done." Jack read the message twice. He appreciated the encouragement, but the pressure was still there. Trump was a man of few words, but when he spoke, those words carried weight. Jack didn't want to disappoint him. He grabbed his jacket, left the office, and headed out to meet with some of the potential investors and contractors for the project. It was late, and the streets were quiet, but Jack's mind was racing. He had no time to waste. The following morning, he arrived early at the construction site. He had scheduled a meeting with the site manager and the architect to go over the plans. As Jack walked around the site, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The space was massive, and there was so much potential. But there were also risks. A project like this could make or break his career. The architect greeted him with a smile. "Glad you're here, Jack. I've got some concerns about the initial design. We may need to adjust some of the layout to accommodate the changes in zoning laws." Jack nodded, trying to keep his composure. "Let's go over the details. We can't afford any delays." They spent hours walking through the plans, making revisions, and figuring out the logistics. By the time they were done, Jack's head was spinning. But he felt good about the changes. He had made decisions, and the team seemed to respect his judgment. That afternoon, Jack met with the investors. The room was filled with high-powered business people, all of them looking at him as if they were sizing him up. Jack could feel the weight of their eyes on him as he sat at the head of the table. "We're interested, Jack," one of the investors said, folding his arms across his chest. "But we want to know why we should put our money into this project. What makes it different?" Jack paused, taking a deep breath. He had done his homework. He knew the market, he knew the trends, and he knew exactly what made this project stand out. "This development," Jack began, his voice steady and confident, "isn't just another luxury building. We're catering to a new generation of professionals who want more than just a place to live. They want a lifestyle, a place that offers both work and play in one location. The commercial spaces will be home to innovative startups, and the residential areas will feature modern, eco-friendly amenities. This is a project that speaks to the future of Manhattan." The investors exchanged glances, some nodding, others looking more skeptical. But Jack kept going, presenting the numbers, showing the projections, and proving that the risk was worth the reward. By the end of the meeting, the investors were on board. They agreed to fund the project, and Jack left the room feeling like he had just won a major victory. But he knew this was just the beginning. There was still so much to be done, and the real work was just starting. That evening, Jack went back to his apartment. He was exhausted but exhilarated. He had successfully secured the funding, and now the project was moving forward. But something nagged at him. He still didn't fully believe in himself. He had done everything right, but the fear of failure still lingered, like a shadow hanging over him. He took a shower to clear his mind, then sat down at the kitchen table to look over the project again. The numbers, the designs, the plan. It all had to come together perfectly. One mistake, one misstep, and everything could fall apart. Suddenly, his phone buzzed again. It was another message from Trump. "I'm watching. Keep it up, Jack. I know you've got it in you." The words hit Jack like a wave of reassurance. Trump had faith in him. Despite everything Jack had been through, the failures, the mistakes, the years spent on the streets, Trump believed in him. And for the first time in a long time, Jack began to believe in himself too. Do you think Jack is ready to handle the pressure of leading this project? How do you think his journey will unfold from here? Will he continue to prove himself, or will the weight of the responsibility overwhelm him? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The next few weeks were a whirlwind for Jack. The mixed-use development project had taken on a life of its own, moving faster than he had anticipated. Meetings with contractors, architects, and investors became his daily routine. His phone was constantly buzzing with updates and requests, and his mind was always on the project. But the pressure was starting to wear him down. Trump had promised him a second chance, but with that promise came expectations, high, unyielding expectations. Jack knew that if he didn't deliver, if the project faltered, he would lose not only the opportunity Trump had given him, but everything he had fought to rebuild. He couldn't afford to fail. One afternoon, Jack was at the construction site, reviewing the progress with the project manager. Things were supposed to be on track, but there were delays. The steel framework for the building was taking longer than expected to complete, and the contractor had requested additional funds to cover the extra labor costs. Jack stood in front of the unfinished structure, staring up at the skeletal outline of what would one day be a luxury building. His mind raced. The numbers didn't add up. The delays were going to push the timeline back, and the additional costs would eat into the project's profitability. He had no room for error. "I'll handle it," Jack said, trying to sound confident despite the storm of anxiety swirling inside him. "I'll make the calls. Get it back on track." But as Jack made his way back to his office, his phone buzzed again. It was a text from Trump. "How's everything going, Jack? I trust you're keeping it under control." The words hit him like a punch in the gut. The last thing Jack wanted was to let Trump down. But he could feel the weight of the responsibility and the pressure tightening around his chest. That evening, Jack stayed late at the office, working through the numbers, trying to find a solution to the budget shortfall. He hadn't slept much in days, and his mind was starting to fog over. But he couldn't stop. The project had to succeed. He had to prove himself. By the time he finally left the office, it was past midnight. He was exhausted, drained, and on the verge of collapse. But his mind refused to shut off. As he made his way back to his apartment, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was in over his head. When he got home, he collapsed onto his bed, the weight of the day crashing down on him. But even as he tried to close his eyes and find some rest, his phone vibrated again. It was a call from an unknown number. Jack hesitated before answering. "Jack, it's me," came Trump's voice on the other end. "How's everything going?" Jack took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He wasn't sure how to explain the situation. The delays, the rising costs, the mounting pressure. He didn't want to admit to Trump that things were spiraling out of control. It's going well, Mr. Trump," Jack said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We're just ironing out a few details, but it's all under control." Trump was quiet for a moment. "Jack, you don't need to pretend everything is perfect. If something's wrong, tell me. We'll figure it out together." Jack felt a knot form in his stomach. He had expected a lecture, or worse, a dismissal. But instead, Trump was offering his support. The words were a relief, but they also made Jack feel vulnerable in a way he wasn't used to. "I'm trying to keep things on track," Jack said, his voice more honest now. "But I've got some issues with the budget and the timeline. I'm not sure we'll meet the deadlines if we don't get a solution soon." Trump's response was calm but direct. "You're facing challenges, Jack. That's part of the game. But you've got to be resourceful. If there's one thing I know, it's that you can't just throw money at a problem and expect it to go away. You have to think outside the box." Jack took a moment to digest Trump's words. He had always relied on hard work and determination, but this was different. This was a high-stakes game, and Jack needed to find a way to win. "I'll figure it out," Jack said, his resolve hardening. "I'll do whatever it takes." "Good," Trump said, his voice carrying a note of approval. "That's the right attitude. Keep me posted. We're all in this together." As the call ended, Jack set the phone down and stared at the ceiling. The weight of his responsibilities had never felt heavier. He had a choice now. He could continue pushing forward, grinding away at the problems, or he could let the pressure break him. Jack wasn't ready to give up. Not after everything he had worked for. But he knew he couldn't do it alone. The next morning, he met with the project manager and the contractor again. This time, he wasn't just going through the motions. He was actively seeking solutions. After some tense negotiations, they managed to secure a smaller loan to cover the short-term costs without compromising the project's integrity. With the funding secured, Jack sent an update to Trump, explaining the situation. Trump's reply was quick and simple. "Good work, Jack. Keep it up." The words were a lifeline. Jack wasn't in the clear yet, but for the first time, he felt like he had a handle on things. Do you think Jack is starting to build the resilience he needs to succeed? Or is he just barely holding it together? How would you handle the pressure if you were in his shoes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. With the funding secured and the budget issues addressed, Jack felt like he had weathered the worst of the storm. For a moment, it seemed like the pressure might finally start to ease. But deep down, Jack knew better. This was just the beginning. The hardest challenges were still ahead. The next few weeks proved that Jack was right to remain cautious. While the budget issues had been sorted out, The timeline was slipping, and delays continued to pile up. The building was coming together, but slowly. The contractors were still struggling with supply chain issues, and the zoning laws had changed once again, forcing Jack and his team to revise their plans. Each time they seemed to gain ground, a new obstacle appeared, and Jack had to figure out how to keep the project moving forward without losing momentum. But despite the mounting difficulties, something had shifted in Jack. He was no longer just the homeless man who had been given a chance. He was starting to feel like a leader. He had proven to himself that he could handle the pressure, and he had begun to earn the respect of the people around him. He wasn't just taking orders anymore. He was making decisions, solving problems, and finding ways to keep the project afloat. One evening, after another long day at the office, Jack sat down at his desk, surrounded by blueprints and construction reports. He was staring at a particularly troublesome section of the plans when his phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from Trump. "How's it going, Jack? I want an update." Jack had been prepared for this moment. He knew Trump would be watching, and he knew that now, more than ever, was the time to prove himself. He quickly typed a response, outlining the progress they had made, the issues they were dealing with, and the solutions they had come up with. He didn't sugarcoat the problems. He was honest about the delays, but he also highlighted the steps they were taking to get back on track. A few minutes later, Trump replied, "Good. Keep pushing. But Jack, remember one thing. You can't do this alone. Don't be afraid to lean on the right people when you need help." The words struck Jack deeply. He had always prided himself on being self-sufficient, on being able to figure things out on his own. But Trump's message was a reminder that no one could succeed entirely by themselves. Leadership wasn't just about making decisions. It was about knowing when to ask for help and trusting others to step up. The next morning, Jack made a decision. He needed to bring in a team of experts, people who had experience in areas where he was still learning. He called in a senior project manager from one of Trump's other developments and asked for advice on how to streamline the process. He also brought in a seasoned architect to help with the new zoning changes and a financial consultant to review the budget again. At first, Jack was nervous. He had always been used to handling things on his own, but he quickly realized that the more people he involved, the stronger the team became. The project began to move forward at a faster pace. The revisions were made, the permits were cleared, and the contractors were finally able to meet the deadlines. There was still a lot of work left to do, but Jack could see the light at the end of the tunnel. One afternoon, as Jack was meeting with the new team, Trump showed up unexpectedly. He was in town for another project and had decided to stop by and check on Jack's progress. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure if he was ready for another evaluation, but he also knew that this was a moment of truth. Trump walked through the construction site with Jack, looking over the plans and the work that had been done so far. Jack could feel the tension in the air as Trump took it all in, his sharp eyes scanning every detail. The sound of hammers and drills echoed in the background as the team continued their work, but for Jack, the world seemed to slow down. When they reached the edge of the site, Trump turned to Jack, his expression unreadable. "All right, Jack," Trump said, his voice steady. "This is impressive. You've done a good job bringing it all together." Jack couldn't help but feel a wave of relief wash over him. He had been waiting for Trump's approval, but more than that, he had been waiting for this moment to confirm that he truly belonged in this world of real estate and high stakes. Trump continued, his tone a bit more serious now. "But this is just the first step. You've got the team, you've got the resources, and you've got the drive. But now, it's time to really make your mark. The next few months are crucial. I'll be watching." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of Trump's words. The pressure wasn't over. In fact, it was only going to increase as the project neared completion. But Jack had come a long way since that first meeting on the street. He was no longer the man who had nothing. Now, he was someone who had a future, one that he had earned. As Trump left the site, Jack watched him disappear into his car. The next few days were filled with more meetings and more decisions, but Jack felt more confident than he ever had before. He had found his rhythm. He had learned how to lead, how to ask for help, and how to manage the pressures of the job. But there was still something Jack had yet to confront, the demons from his past. The feelings of guilt and shame, the years of being invisible, and the self-doubt that still lingered in the quiet moments. Jack knew that success wasn't just about the project or the money. It was about proving to himself that he was worthy of the second chance he had been given. The real test would come when the building was complete. The project was nearly finished, and everything Jack had worked for would soon be on display. He couldn't wait to see the finished product, but more than that, he was eager to see what he had become in the process. Do you think Jack is ready for the final stage of the project? What do you think the next challenge will be for him? Will his past ever catch up to him, or has he truly moved past it? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. As the weeks ticked down to the final stages of the project, Jack felt both excitement and dread building in him. The construction site was abuzz with activity, workers hammering, cranes lifting, and trucks hauling materials. Every corner of the site was alive with movement, each step inching them closer to the grand unveiling. Yet, even as everything seemed to be falling into place, Jack couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something might go wrong. The pressure was building to a fever pitch. He had spent months meticulously overseeing every detail, but as the finishing touches were being applied, a sinking feeling lingered in the pit of his stomach. His mind constantly raced, thinking about every possible scenario, from the project being completed late to unforeseen complications with permits. His eyes scanned the blueprints one last time, double-checking every measurement, every detail. He knew he couldn't afford to miss anything. Trump had been silent for the past few weeks, but Jack knew he was watching. Trump's absence had made Jack feel the weight of his responsibility even more. Trump had entrusted him with the project, but now, as the final days loomed, Jack was beginning to feel the crushing burden of that trust. One evening, Jack was walking around the site, inspecting the last of the work being done on the building's facade when he received a call. It was from Lisa, the financial consultant he had brought in earlier to help streamline the project's budget. "Jack, I just wanted to update you on the financial side of things," Lisa said, her voice tense. "We're coming in slightly over budget, and I'm not sure how we're going to make up the difference without cutting into the quality of the build. We might need to reallocate some funds from another area." Jack took a deep breath. Over budget? It was the last thing he needed to hear. He had already been juggling so many issues, from the contractor delays to the zoning changes. But he couldn't let this new problem derail the entire project. The clock was ticking, and he had promised Trump that he would deliver. "All right," Jack said, trying to keep his cool. "Let's review the numbers together. We'll find a solution." They spent the next hour going over the figures. It wasn't easy, but Jack knew he couldn't afford to make rash decisions. He and Lisa hashed out a plan that involved cutting some non-essential features without compromising the integrity of the building. Jack gave the go-ahead, hoping they had made the right choices. When the call ended, Jack sat in his truck for a moment, staring out at the skyline. He was exhausted, physically, mentally, and emotionally. The weight of the project was taking a toll on him, but he couldn't give up now. He had come too far. The next day, Jack met with the design team to review the final plans for the building's interior. There was one last big decision to make: what to do with the luxury penthouse. The property's value was skyrocketing, and the penthouse had become the crown jewel of the development. The pressure was on to make it perfect, but as Jack looked over the design mock-ups, something didn't sit right with him. The penthouse, though beautiful, felt like it was too much, an over-the-top display of wealth and opulence. He had seen it all before, luxury for the sake of luxury. It didn't align with the vision he had for this project, a modern, forward-thinking space that balanced luxury with practicality. He didn't want to build just another showpiece. He wanted to build something that felt real. He spoke with the lead designer. "I know this penthouse is a huge selling point," Jack said, "but it feels excessive. Can we scale it down? Maybe add more sustainable features and make the space more functional, rather than just lavish." The designer raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "It's possible. We can cut back on some of the extravagances and make it more eco-friendly. But we'll need to rework some of the design elements." Jack made the call. The building wasn't just about luxury. It was about creating a lifestyle, a place where people could live, work, and thrive. He needed to stay true to that vision, no matter the cost. That afternoon, as Jack was walking back to his truck, his phone buzzed. It was Trump. "I'll be in town tomorrow. I want to see the progress." The message was short, but it sent a jolt of nervous energy through Jack. Trump was coming. Tomorrow, the day he had been dreading and anticipating, was finally here. The following day, Jack arrived at the site early, readying himself for Trump's visit. The building was nearly complete, but there were still a few areas that needed a last-minute touch-up. He walked through the halls, ensuring everything was in place. The hallways gleamed, the windows sparkled, and the luxury lobby was starting to take shape. Everything looked perfect, or at least, it would be if the final pieces fell into place. When Trump arrived, he was all business. He didn't waste time with pleasantries, his sharp gaze immediately scanning the entire site as if assessing every detail. Jack showed him around, explaining the choices they had made, the design changes, the budget adjustments, and the final push to meet the deadline. Trump listened quietly, nodding occasionally, but Jack could feel the pressure mounting with every step. This was the moment of truth. Trump wasn't here for a tour. He was here to see if Jack had delivered. They reached the penthouse last. Trump stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the city below. Jack could feel his heart pounding. This was it. This was the key to the entire project. If Trump didn't like the changes, if he thought they had scaled back too much, the whole thing could collapse. Trump turned to Jack. "It's different," he said, his voice calm. But Jack couldn't tell if it was approval or disappointment. "But I like it. It's more in line with what the city needs right now. This is the future of luxury living." A sense of relief washed over Jack, but it was quickly replaced by a wave of pride. He had done it. He had taken risks, made tough decisions, and stayed true to his vision. The project was a success, and Trump had acknowledged it. Trump clapped Jack on the back. "Good job. You did more than just finish a building. You've created something that stands for something. Keep it up." Jack smiled, a mixture of exhaustion and triumph filling him. He had finally proven that he belonged, not just in the world of real estate, but in the world of possibility. Do you think Jack is truly ready to take on even bigger projects in the future, or do you think the weight of his past might hold him back? How did you feel about his decision to change the penthouse design? Was it the right choice? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The days after Trump's visit were a blur of activity. The building was finished, and Jack's team worked around the clock to ensure the grand opening would go off without a hitch. The penthouse had been revamped, the luxury apartments were staged to perfection, and the finishing touches to the lobby and common areas were completed with meticulous care. Everything had come together, even better than Jack had imagined. As the official launch date approached, the excitement around the project reached a fever pitch. There were press releases to finalize, marketing materials to distribute, and VIP invitations to send out. Investors and potential buyers lined up to get a first look at the property. The building was already attracting attention, and not just because of the luxury amenities, but because of its bold new approach to high-end living. Jack felt a nervous excitement deep in his chest. He had spent so long working on this moment, and now it was finally here. The project he had worked tirelessly on, the one that had taken him from the streets to the heights of high-stakes real estate, was about to make its public debut. The morning of the grand opening, Jack stood at the entrance of the building, looking up at the gleaming structure. It was everything he had hoped for, but at the same time, it felt like a symbol of everything he had lost and everything he had gained. The weight of the past lingered in the back of his mind, but today wasn't about his past. It was about the future. Trump arrived shortly before the event began. He was dressed in his signature tailored suit, a briefcase in hand, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. He gave Jack a nod of approval as he walked past, and Jack couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. This was the man who had given him a second chance, who had placed his faith in him when everyone else had written him off. And now, Jack was standing here, on the verge of something huge. As the doors opened and the first guests began to arrive, Jack moved through the crowd, shaking hands with investors, contractors, and potential buyers. His pulse raced with every conversation, his heart swelling with the knowledge that this moment, this victory, was his. But amid the celebration, there was one person Jack couldn't stop looking for. Lisa. She had been instrumental in keeping the project on track financially, and Jack knew she deserved a huge part of the credit for its success. He spotted her across the room, speaking with a couple of investors. He made his way over to her, feeling a sense of gratitude bubbling up inside him. "Lisa," he said, tapping her on the shoulder, "I just wanted to say thank you. You really helped make this possible." She turned around and smiled, her eyes lighting up. "Jack, it's been a pleasure. You did all the hard work. This is all you." Jack shook his head. "No, I couldn't have done it without you. We make a great team." They shared a moment of silent understanding, two people who had been through the grind together and come out victorious on the other side. As the evening wore on and the last guests began to leave, Jack found himself standing alone on the rooftop, gazing out over the city. The building glittered in the lights of the setting sun, a towering symbol of everything he had worked for. The past few months had been the most challenging and transformative of his life. He had gone from being homeless, to working a dead-end job, to managing one of the most talked-about projects in the city. He had risen from the depths of despair and uncertainty to this, a new life, a new future. But Jack knew that this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. This project, this building, was just the beginning. He had proven to himself that he had the drive, the vision, and the ability to succeed. The next chapter of his life was already taking shape, and he was ready for it. As the last of the guests departed and the lights of the city shimmered below, Jack made a silent vow to himself. He would never go back to the life he had once known. No matter what obstacles came his way, he would face them head-on. He had found his place in the world, and nothing was going to take it away from him. Trump's voice broke through his thoughts, suddenly behind him. "Impressive, Jack. You've done something special here." Jack turned to find Trump standing by his side, a proud smile on his face. "You really did it, didn't you?" Trump continued. "This building, this project, is your legacy. You've earned it." Jack smiled back, a feeling of gratitude swelling in his chest. "Thank you, Mr. Trump. I couldn't have done it without you." Trump gave him a knowing look. "I knew you had it in you, Jack. Now, don't stop. This is just the beginning." Jack nodded, looking out over the skyline. His future, once uncertain and filled with doubt, now stretched out before him like an open road. And for the first time in his life, he felt ready to walk down that road, one step at a time. Jack has made it to the top, but now the real challenge begins. What comes next? How do you think he will handle the pressure of building a lasting legacy? Do you think he will stay grounded, or get caught up in the world of luxury and success? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The weeks following the grand opening were a whirlwind for Jack. The buzz around the building was growing, and so were the stakes. With the success of the project, he found himself thrust into a new world, one filled with high-level meetings, negotiations, and high-profile investors. The phone calls came in daily, each one more urgent than the last, as Jack began to navigate the complexities of running a major real estate operation. But despite the external accolades and success, Jack couldn't shake a feeling of unease that had been creeping into his thoughts. He was finally living the life he had dreamed of, but with this new success came new pressures. He wasn't just the guy who had built the building. Now, he was expected to lead an entire company. He was responsible for hundreds of employees, millions of dollars in investment, and an ever-growing list of stakeholders. As Jack took on more and more responsibility, the weight of leadership began to settle on his shoulders. He quickly realized that being a leader wasn't just about making big decisions. It was about managing people, keeping the team motivated, and making sure the vision stayed on track. It was about building relationships and fostering trust. It was about knowing when to step in and when to step back. One late afternoon, Jack sat in his office, looking over the latest reports. Everything seemed to be moving smoothly, but there was a looming issue that had been bothering him for days. The next project, a massive luxury condo development, was rapidly approaching. The plan had already been approved, the land secured, and the financing in place. But the more Jack thought about it, the more he felt a nagging sense of doubt. The project, while lucrative, was exactly the kind of development he had tried to avoid when he first entered the industry. It was another high-end, luxury building, more of the same. What had started as a chance to create something different, something real, had turned into another opportunity to cash in on opulence and excess. Jack couldn't ignore the feeling that this wasn't the legacy he wanted to build. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. "Come in," Jack called out. his mind still preoccupied with the project ahead. It was Lisa, his trusted financial consultant, who had been with him since the early days of the first building. She stepped into the room, holding a stack of papers. Her usual confident demeanor was tempered by a hint of concern. "Jack, I need to talk to you about something," she said, sitting down across from him. "What's going on?" Jack asked, setting the reports aside. Lisa hesitated for a moment, then handed him the papers. They were financial projections for the luxury condo project. Jack scanned the numbers, his eyes narrowing. The margins were high, but so were the costs. It was another project that seemed designed to maximize profit rather than meet a real need. "I've been reviewing the numbers," Lisa began, "and there are some concerns. The market is changing, and this type of development might not be as profitable as we think. We're looking at a lot of risk, and I'm not sure it aligns with the direction you've been talking about." Jack looked up, meeting her gaze. "What do you mean?" Lisa leaned forward. "You've been talking about sustainability, about creating spaces that actually serve the community. This project doesn't fit with that vision. It's just more luxury units for the wealthy. And with the current economic climate, I'm not sure it's going to sell as easily as we think. I think we should reconsider the scope." Jack felt a cold rush of realization. Lisa was right. His gut had been telling him the same thing. He had spent so long chasing success that he had lost sight of the bigger picture. He had wanted to build something different, something that would stand out, not just another flashy development. "I've been thinking about it too," Jack admitted, rubbing his temples. "This doesn't feel right. It's not the legacy I want to leave behind. I thought I could balance the luxury with something meaningful, but maybe I've been fooling myself." Lisa nodded. "I think you need to decide what kind of developer you want to be. Do you want to keep chasing the high-end market, or do you want to make a real impact on the community?" Jack stared out the window, lost in thought. This wasn't just a decision about the project. It was about his future, his identity as a leader. He had started this journey to make a difference, to create spaces that mattered, not just to make money. But now, he found himself at a crossroads. Could he still pursue his vision while taking on these massive projects, or was he sacrificing his integrity for the sake of profit? "You're right," Jack said finally, his voice steady but resolute. "I didn't come this far just to create another luxury building. We need to rethink this project. It's time to do something different, something that aligns with what we've been talking about all along." Lisa's eyes brightened with approval. "I knew you'd get there. I'll start working on some alternatives that align better with your vision." Jack nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Reworking the condo project would take time, effort, and a lot of convincing. There would be investors to answer to, and the financial risks were much higher. But he didn't care. He had learned the hard way that success wasn't just about the bottom line. It was about making a difference, about creating something that truly mattered. The next day, Jack called a meeting with his core team: Lisa, the architects, the design experts, and the project managers. He explained his decision to scale back the luxury elements and reimagine the project. Instead of building high-end condos, they would focus on creating a sustainable, community-driven space that could serve a broader demographic. "We're going to create something that actually contributes to the neighborhood," Jack said, his voice full of conviction. "We'll include affordable housing, eco-friendly designs, and spaces that will benefit the community, not just the elite. We're going to change the narrative. It's time for us to put people before profits." There were murmurs around the room, some of surprise, others of skepticism. The project was already set in motion, and there were significant risks involved. But Jack didn't back down. He knew this was the right move. It was a chance to build something that could truly make a difference. As the meeting ended and the team dispersed to begin the redesign, Jack took a moment to breathe. It was a huge risk. The financial implications were enormous. But he felt a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in months. This was who he was. This was the leader he wanted to be. Jack has made a bold decision to pivot from luxury condos to community-focused development. Do you think this will be the right move for him in the long run? Or do you think it's too risky? How do you think his decision will impact his legacy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Jack's decision to pivot the luxury condo project into a community-driven development was met with mixed reactions. On one hand, his core team rallied behind him, impressed by his renewed vision. On the other hand, many of the investors were nervous, and the higher-ups in his company weren't exactly thrilled. The shift from profit-driven luxury housing to affordable, sustainable spaces wasn't just a new direction. It was a gamble. In the weeks following the decision, Jack found himself in a whirlwind of meetings. He was constantly on the phone with investors, negotiating the terms of the redesign, assuring them that the project was still viable, even if it was no longer going to yield the same profit margins. The pressure weighed heavily on him, but he couldn't back down. Not now. Despite the growing resistance from some investors, Jack felt a quiet sense of determination. The more he thought about it, the more he was convinced that this was the right move, not just for him, but for the city. He wasn't just building a building. He was building a future, and the kind of future he wanted to be part of was one where communities thrived, not just individuals. One afternoon, Jack met with a group of architects and urban planners to discuss the redesign. They sat around a large table, papers and plans scattered in front of them. The energy in the room was different now, more creative, more energized. The group was on board with the new vision. "We can do something special here," said Maria, the lead architect. "If we incorporate more green spaces, communal areas, and mixed-income housing, this could be a landmark development. Something the city hasn't seen before." Jack nodded, but his mind was still racing. He wasn't just thinking about the physical building anymore. He was thinking about the people who would live in it. "I want this to be a place where anyone can feel at home," he said. "It needs to reflect the diversity of the community, different incomes, different backgrounds, different lifestyles." Maria smiled. "We can make that happen. We'll need to adjust the design, of course, but the concept is solid. People will see the value in it." The meeting lasted for hours as they fine-tuned the plans, but by the end of it, Jack felt a renewed sense of optimism. They had a blueprint that was not just ambitious but visionary. It was going to be a challenge. There was no denying that, but Jack was ready for it. However, as the day went on, Jack received a call that put a damper on his optimism. It was from one of his major investors, Robert Hinton, a real estate mogul who had poured a significant amount of money into the original luxury project. Robert wasn't happy. "Jack, we need to talk." Robert's voice boomed over the phone. "I've heard about your new direction for the building, and frankly, I'm not thrilled." Jack braced himself. "I know it's a big shift, Robert, but I truly believe this is the best long-term move for the city and for us." "Best long-term move?" Robert scoffed. "This isn't about the long term, Jack. This is about returns. You're telling me you're going to risk all of that for affordable housing and sustainability?" His voice was dripping with sarcasm. "That's a nice little buzzword, but it doesn't pay the bills. I invested in luxury. I invested in exclusivity. I didn't sign up for this." Jack felt his jaw tighten. "I understand where you're coming from, Robert, but this is what I believe in. I'm not going to build another building just for the wealthy. I want to do something that will leave a real impact." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Robert spoke again, his tone more measured. "Look, Jack, I've got a lot of money tied up in this, and I'm not about to let you derail it for some pipe dream. You've got one shot at this. You either deliver, or I pull out. Do you understand?" Jack clenched his fists. The threat was clear. If Robert pulled out, it could mean the end of the entire project. The pressure was mounting, but Jack refused to back down. "I understand, Robert, but I'm not going to compromise on what I believe in. If that means you pulling out, then so be it. But I'm moving forward with this." The line went silent for a few seconds before Robert sighed. "You've got guts, Jack. I'll give you that. But don't say I didn't warn you. I'll be watching closely." Jack hung up the phone, feeling the weight of the conversation settle in. He had just made a bold move, but it had come with consequences. Robert wasn't the only investor who felt uncertain about the new direction. Others would follow Robert's lead, and soon, the money could dry up. But Jack had made his decision. He wasn't going to compromise. The next few days were filled with tension. Jack worked long hours with his team to finalize the new design plans, all while fielding phone calls from nervous investors. Some were still on board, intrigued by the new direction, while others threatened to withdraw their funding. Jack knew that every moment he spent negotiating with these investors was a moment that could make or break the future of the project. As the redesign began to take shape, Jack started to question his decision. Had he made the right call? Would the community truly appreciate the new vision? Or had he alienated those who had supported him from the start? There were moments of doubt, but Jack reminded himself why he had started this journey in the first place. He wasn't in this for the money. He wasn't in it for the accolades or the luxury. He was in it to make a difference. And no matter the cost, he was determined to see it through. The following week, Jack received another call, this time from Trump. His mentor's voice was steady and calm, but there was a sharpness to it that Jack couldn't ignore. "I've been hearing about the changes you're making," Trump said. "Are you sure about this, Jack?" "It's a big gamble." Jack hesitated before responding. "I'm sure. This project needs to be something that benefits everyone, not just the rich. We're reimagining what luxury really means." Trump chuckled. "I admire your conviction, Jack. But don't forget one thing. In business, results matter. If you can prove that your vision works, then you'll win. If it doesn't, you'll pay the price." "I know," Jack said, his voice firm, "but I'm not afraid to take that risk." There was a pause on the line before Trump spoke again, this time with a note of respect. "Then you've got my support. Just remember, Jack, this is your shot. Don't lose your nerve." Jack thanked Trump and hung up, feeling a sense of resolve settle over him. This was his moment. He wasn't going to back down, no matter how tough things got. Jack is facing immense pressure from investors who want to pull out due to his shift in project direction. Do you think Jack should stick to his guns and pursue his vision, or should he compromise to secure the funding? How do you think his decision will shape his future in real estate? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The weeks following Jack's decision to move forward with his revised vision for the development project were a blur of sleepless nights, high-stakes meetings, and an overwhelming sense of pressure. Every day, Jack received phone calls and emails from investors, some reassuring him that they would stay the course, and others threatening to pull their investments if he didn't return to the original, luxury-centric plan. It seemed that no matter how many reassurances he gave, the doubt never fully went away. Despite the mounting resistance, Jack remained steadfast. He believed in his vision, in the idea of creating something more meaningful than just a collection of expensive condos. But with every conversation, the reality of the situation began to sink in. If he couldn't convince enough investors to stay on board, the project could very well collapse. Lisa was his closest ally throughout it all, working tirelessly behind the scenes to recalibrate financial projections and find new investors who would share Jack's vision. But even she couldn't hide her concern as the weeks dragged on. "Jack," Lisa said one afternoon, her voice tinged with worry as they sat in his office, surrounded by spreadsheets and proposal documents, "we're running out of time. We're not just up against investors who want to pull out. We're also up against time. If we don't secure enough funding soon, we might lose the window of opportunity to keep this project alive." Jack leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. The stress had taken a toll on him, both mentally and physically. He hadn't slept properly in weeks, and the once clear vision he had for the future now seemed clouded by doubt. "I know," Jack said, his voice strained, "but I can't go back to building for the ultra-rich. That's not what I started this for." Lisa sighed and sat forward, placing a hand on his desk. "I get it, Jack. I really do. But this is a business, not just a dream. And right now, it's not about your vision anymore. It's about keeping the lights on, keeping the project alive. We need to be pragmatic." Jack's gaze hardened. "You're right. We need to be pragmatic. But that doesn't mean giving up everything we've worked for." Lisa hesitated, then said what Jack had been dreading to hear. "I know, but you're running out of options. If you don't find a way to compromise, we might not have a project to fight for anymore." The weight of her words hit him harder than he had expected. It was one thing to feel the pressure from investors, but hearing it from Lisa, someone who had stood by him from the very beginning, made it feel real. The dream he had worked so hard for, the one that was supposed to change everything, was on the line. The next day, Jack found himself in yet another high-stakes meeting. This time, he was sitting across from Robert Hinton, the investor who had been the most vocal about his dissatisfaction with Jack's change in direction. Robert was no longer just concerned. He was furious. "I told you, Jack, this was a bad idea," Robert said, his voice cold. "And now we're paying the price for it. You've lost most of your luxury buyers, and we're not getting anywhere with the new approach. I want to know how you plan to fix this." Jack's hands were clenched at his sides, but he kept his voice calm. "I'm working on it, Robert, but I can't just revert to the old plan. It's not who I am anymore." "You need to be more than who you are, Jack. You need to be a businessman," Robert snapped. "And right now, this is looking like a disaster. If you don't find a way to turn this around fast, I'm pulling out, and I'm sure others will follow." Jack's stomach tightened, but he refused to back down. "I've come too far to turn back now. We'll find a way to make this work. I just need time." "Time is running out," Robert said, standing up from the table. "And so is my patience. You're playing a dangerous game, Jack. Make sure you're ready to face the consequences." As Robert walked out of the room, Jack felt the full weight of the situation crash down on him. He had always prided himself on his ability to think big and take risks, but now those risks were starting to feel like a trap. With every investor who pulled out, with every setback that came his way, Jack was being forced to question his own resolve. Later that evening, as Jack walked the city streets to clear his head, he passed by a familiar spot, the same park bench where he had met Trump all those months ago. It seemed like a lifetime since that chance encounter, when a homeless man had asked for $1, and Jack had responded by changing his life forever. Now, here he was, a successful developer on the brink of losing everything. Jack sat on the bench, his mind racing. Could he really go through with this? Could he risk everything he had built just to prove a point? Or was it time to accept that maybe his vision wasn't feasible, not in the cutthroat world of real estate? The answer wasn't easy, but Jack knew that he had to make a decision, and soon. His options were narrowing, and the pressure was mounting. What would it mean to compromise on his vision? And what would it cost him if he didn't? As he sat there, staring out into the darkened skyline, Jack heard a familiar voice. "Thinking about it again, huh?" Jack looked up to see Trump walking toward him. For a moment, Jack wondered if the universe was sending him a sign. "I can't keep doing this, Trump," Jack admitted, his voice raw. "I've pushed everyone away, and now I'm about to lose everything I worked for. The investors are pulling out. I'm running out of time. I don't know what to do." Trump sat down beside him, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Let me tell you something, Jack. Every successful person I know has been at that breaking point. I've been there. Hell, I've been on the brink of losing everything more times than I can count. But here's the thing. You can't let the pressure force you to forget who you are. If you give up on your vision, you'll lose more than just the project. You'll lose yourself." Jack looked at him, the weight of his words sinking in. "But what if I can't make it work? What if I've already made too many mistakes?" "You're always going to make mistakes. It's part of the game," Trump replied, his voice firm. "But you can't let fear stop you. If you truly believe in what you're doing, then you keep going. The world will always try to knock you down, but it's how you get back up that matters." Jack sat in silence, letting Trump's words sink in. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of clarity. He had come too far to give up now. "Thanks, Trump," Jack said, standing up. "I needed that." Trump smiled, giving him a nod of approval. "Good. Now get out there and make it happen." As Jack walked away, he knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let this setback define him. He had a vision, and he was going to fight for it, no matter the cost. Jack is at a crossroads. Should he stick to his vision, even if it means risking everything, or should he compromise to keep the project alive? What would you do if you were in his shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Jack's mind was still spinning with Trump's words as he walked back to his office. Every step felt heavier, but there was a renewed sense of purpose in him. He wasn't going to let fear or doubt stop him. His vision was bigger than the short-term pressures. He believed in it, and he was going to fight for it. When Jack returned to his office, Lisa was already there, waiting. She looked up from her desk as he walked in, her face a mixture of concern and curiosity. He didn't need to say anything. She could see it in his eyes. "I talked to Trump," Jack said, sitting down across from her. "He reminded me that I can't let fear dictate my decisions." Lisa nodded, her gaze softening. "Good. You've been under a lot of pressure, Jack. But you're not alone in this. We can figure it out together." Jack leaned forward, his voice steadier now. "I've decided I'm not backing down. I'm not going to compromise on the vision. If the investors don't want to come along for the ride, then we'll find new ones." Lisa smiled, relieved. "I knew you'd come around. You've got the right idea, but we need to act fast. The clock is ticking, and the project's future depends on us securing enough funding. We can't afford to waste any more time." "I know," Jack said, running a hand through his hair. "But it's not just about finding any investors. We need people who believe in the vision, who aren't just looking for quick returns. I'm done with the kind of money that's only interested in luxury condos for the elite." "Exactly," Lisa agreed. "We need to target impact investors. Those who understand that building a better future means investing in people, not just profits." Jack's mind raced as the pieces began to fall into place. If he could find investors who cared about making a difference, who weren't focused solely on profit margins, maybe he could turn this around. The community-focused approach could still work. It had to. But it wouldn't be easy. A few days later, Jack and Lisa attended a high-profile real estate conference in the city. It was a long shot, but it was an opportunity to meet potential investors who might share their values. Jack had prepared a new pitch, one that wasn't just about the building, but about the future it represented. He didn't want to just sell a property. He wanted to sell an idea, a community where people of all backgrounds could live, grow, and thrive. As Jack stepped into the conference hall, he felt a surge of energy. He wasn't just a developer anymore. He was an advocate for a new kind of real estate, one that balanced social impact with sustainable development. It wasn't going to be easy, but he had already made up his mind. He wasn't going to compromise. At the conference, Jack was introduced to several potential investors who seemed genuinely interested in his vision. One in particular, Emily Green, was an impact investor with a background in sustainable development. She had a reputation for funding projects that prioritized both environmental sustainability and social equity, exactly what Jack needed. "I love what you're proposing," Emily said, after listening intently to Jack's pitch. "This is exactly the kind of project the city needs. But I have to be honest with you, Jack. It's going to take more than just a good idea to make this work. We need to see solid financial projections, a clear plan, and a committed team behind it." "I understand," Jack replied, feeling the weight of her words. "We've been working hard on the financials. I'm confident we can make this project not only feasible but successful. It's about creating value for the community, and I believe that's something investors will see." Emily nodded thoughtfully. "I appreciate your passion, and I can see that you're serious about making this happen. Let's take a deeper look at the numbers and talk about how we can collaborate. But I'll warn you, this will require patience, and it won't be without risk." Jack smiled, relieved. "That's exactly what we're ready for." The following weeks were filled with intense negotiations and careful planning. Emily and her team reviewed every aspect of the project, from financial models to environmental impact assessments. Jack, Lisa, and their team worked around the clock to ensure that they were prepared for any questions or concerns. They knew that this was their last chance to save the project, and they weren't going to let it slip away. As the discussions progressed, Jack found himself more confident than ever. Emily was tough, but she understood the long-term potential of the project. She saw the value in what Jack was trying to create, something that was more than just a real estate development. It was a chance to transform the city, to provide affordable housing and green spaces in a world where those things were becoming increasingly rare. In the end, after weeks of back and forth, they reached an agreement. Emily would invest in the project, along with several other like-minded investors who were committed to its success. The deal wasn't perfect. It came with certain conditions and a lot of risk, but it was enough to keep the project alive. Jack couldn't believe it. The dream he had fought so hard for was still within reach. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be many more obstacles ahead, but he finally felt like he was on the right path. He had made the right decision. With the funding secured, Jack and Lisa began to move forward with the project. The team started work on the redesign, incorporating more green spaces, sustainable building materials, and community-driven elements. The new approach was starting to take shape, and the excitement within the team was palpable. Jack could feel it. This was going to be something special. Despite the progress, there were still hurdles to overcome. The media caught wind of the shift in direction, and not everyone was thrilled about the change. The luxury market was still a major force in the city, and some critics argued that Jack's new approach would fail to attract the right buyers. But Jack wasn't concerned. He had already made his decision. This wasn't about pleasing critics or appeasing investors who only cared about the bottom line. This was about creating something that would stand the test of time, something that would make a real difference. One morning, as Jack walked through the construction site, he paused to take in the view. The skeletal framework of the building was beginning to take shape, but there was still a long way to go. Lisa stood beside him, looking up at the progress. "It's coming together, Jack. This is going to be incredible." Jack nodded, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. "We're doing it, Lisa. We're really doing it." But even as the project moved forward, Jack knew that the road ahead wouldn't be without challenges. There would be setbacks, delays, and more difficult decisions to make. But for the first time in weeks, he felt hopeful. This was his vision. This was the future he believed in. And no matter what happened, Jack knew he was ready to fight for it. Jack and Lisa have finally secured the funding they need for their vision. But there are still critics and challenges ahead. Do you think they'll be able to pull it off? Or will the roadblock ahead be too much? What would you do if you were in Jack's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. The excitement from securing the funding was still fresh, but as Jack and his team began to roll up their sleeves and dive into the next phase of the project, a new, unexpected challenge began to emerge. It wasn't one that Jack had anticipated, at least, not in the way it unfolded. One crisp morning, as Jack was reviewing the latest project update with Lisa in the conference room, his phone buzzed. It was a notification from the city council. He opened the message quickly and read the headline aloud. City council votes to freeze new development projects in the area due to zoning concerns. Lisa's eyes widened. What does this mean for us? Jack's pulse quickened. It means we're in trouble. For the last few weeks, the city had been in the midst of a major debate over zoning laws and urban development. There had been public outcry from certain groups about gentrification, the loss of green spaces, and the growing divide between wealthy and low-income residents. Jack had heard the rumblings but had assumed they wouldn't have any immediate impact on his project. He'd been wrong. As he scanned the email, Jack saw that the council's vote had been unanimous. No new development projects could move forward in the area until further reviews were completed. This freeze wasn't just a minor delay, it was a full-scale roadblock. By the time Jack met with Emily Green later that afternoon, the weight of the situation was crushing him. The city council's decision threatened to derail everything they'd worked for. All the meetings, all the progress, all the excitement. It felt like it could all come crashing down in an instant. "I don't understand," Emily said, clearly frustrated. "We've been working on this for weeks, and now you're telling me the city is halting all development in the area? How can this happen so suddenly?" Jack sat across from her, trying to keep his composure. "The council just voted today. They're citing concerns about gentrification, environmental impacts, and the lack of affordable housing in the area. This isn't just a delay. They're putting a freeze on all new projects until further reviews can be done." Emily's eyes narrowed as she processed the news. "So, what's our next step?" "I don't know," Jack admitted. "We're in a holding pattern until the city figures out what they want to do. This could take months, maybe even longer. And right now, every day counts. We can't afford that kind of delay." Emily stood up, her frustration now turning into determination. "We can't let this stop us, Jack. You've fought too hard for this to let something like this take you down. We need to be proactive. We need to be involved in this process, influencing the discussion from the inside. You've got connections with the council, right?" Jack thought about it. He had worked with city officials in the past and had built a network of contacts over the years. But this was different. The council's decision wasn't just about policy. It was about public opinion, and that was something he didn't have control over. "I do have some connections," Jack said, though his voice wavered slightly. "But this isn't going to be easy. The pressure from the community is intense. They're worried about losing their homes, their neighborhoods." Emily raised an eyebrow. "And that's why we need to show them that we're not part of the problem. Your project could be the solution they're looking for, if we can present it that way. You've got a choice here, Jack. You can sit back and wait for the city to figure this out, or you can take action and prove that your development can bring positive change." Jack was silent for a moment, considering her words. She was right. The project wasn't just about building a structure. It was about community and about helping people who had been left behind by years of neglect. If he could frame it that way, maybe the council would see his project in a new light. Okay, Jack said finally, standing up. I'll reach out to my contacts. If we're going to fight this freeze, we need to change the narrative. We need to show them that this development isn't just for the rich, it's for everyone. Emily nodded, a satisfied look on her face. Good. Let's get to work. Over the next few days, Jack threw himself into the battle. He met with local activists, community leaders, and city officials to try and persuade them that his project was the solution, not the problem. He didn't have the luxury of waiting for the zoning issues to resolve themselves. He had to convince the council that his vision was aligned with the needs of the community. The process wasn't easy. Jack had to wade through a sea of passionate arguments, angry protests, and mounting public skepticism. But he remained focused. He knew that this was his chance to prove the worth of his vision, not just to the investors, but to the city itself. One evening, after a long meeting with the city council, Jack sat in a small diner with Lisa, going over their next steps. He was exhausted, and it felt like every minute was a race against time. I think we're starting to make some headway, Lisa said, glancing at the stack of notes in front of them. But we're going to need more support. There are still a lot of people who don't trust that we're not just another developer trying to push them out of their homes. Jack rubbed his temples. I know, but I can't back down. I believe in this project. I have to make them see it too. Lisa smiled at him, a hint of admiration in her eyes. You've got a lot of people believing in you, Jack. Don't forget that. It was a week later when Jack received the news that he had been waiting for. The city council had agreed to a public forum where developers, activists, and community members could come together and discuss potential solutions to the zoning issue. It wasn't a full resolution, but it was a breakthrough. Jack wasn't sure if the council was swayed by his efforts, or if they simply realized that keeping the development freeze in place was unsustainable. But for the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. He had fought the odds, and now, he had a chance to make his case in front of the people who could change everything. As Jack prepared for the forum, he knew that this wasn't just about saving a project. It was about showing the city that development and community could go hand in hand. It was about proving that real estate didn't have to be a zero-sum game. He wasn't going to back down. This was his chance to make the world see what he believed in. Jack is facing an unexpected challenge. The city council has put a freeze on development in the area. But Jack isn't backing down. Do you think he can convince the council and the community that his project is part of the solution? What would you do if you were in his shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The day of the public forum arrived, and Jack felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. The fate of his project, and the vision he had spent months crafting, was now in the hands of the city council and the public. He knew it was a make-or-break moment. If he could convince the people who mattered most, this could be the breakthrough he had been waiting for. If not, everything could come crashing down. Lisa stood by his side as they arrived at the venue, a large auditorium in the heart of the city. It was packed. There were community activists with signs, real estate developers in suits, and ordinary citizens who had come to voice their concerns about the future of their neighborhoods. The air was thick with tension, and Jack could feel the weight of the moment. As they took their seats, Jack's mind raced. He had spent hours preparing his speech, but no amount of rehearsing could prepare him for the unpredictability of the crowd. This wasn't a corporate boardroom. It was a room full of people who had real, personal stakes in the future of this city. Stay calm, Lisa whispered, her voice steady. You've got this. Jack nodded, but the knot in his stomach remained. He knew Lisa was right. He had to stay focused. This was his chance to prove that he wasn't just another developer out to make a quick profit. He was building something that could change the city, something that would benefit everyone, not just the rich. The first part of the forum was dominated by speeches from activists who voiced their concerns about the growing gentrification in the area. They spoke about displaced families, skyrocketing rents, and the loss of affordable housing. Their words were impassioned, and the crowd responded with applause. Jack couldn't help but feel the weight of their accusations. He knew the community was hurting, but he also knew that his project could offer a solution. Then it was Jack's turn to speak. He stood up, took a deep breath, and made his way to the stage. As he looked out at the crowd, he felt the full force of their gaze upon him. Some faces were skeptical, others hostile, but there were a few who seemed curious, willing to listen. "Good evening," Jack began, his voice steady despite the flutter in his chest. "My name is Jack Marshall, and I'm here because I believe in this city. I believe in its potential, and I believe that we can build a future where everyone has a place, no matter their background or income level." He paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. He could feel the eyes of the room on him, waiting to see what he would say next. "I know there's a lot of concern about gentrification and the impact of new developments. Trust me, I get it. I've seen firsthand how rising rents and luxury developments can push out people who've lived in this city for generations. But I want to make it clear, that's not what we're doing here. This project isn't just about building high-end condos for the rich. It's about creating a space where people can live, work, and grow together, where affordable housing, green spaces, and sustainable development are at the heart of the plan." Jack's voice grew stronger as he spoke. He had prepared for this moment for months, and now it felt like everything was coming together. "We're going to use sustainable materials, create green spaces that will be accessible to everyone, and we're committed to providing affordable housing options for families who have been displaced by rising rents. This project is not just for the wealthy. It's for the people who live here, who have been part of this community for decades." He looked out at the crowd, meeting their gazes, hoping to see a shift in their reaction. "I know it won't be easy," Jack continued. "I know there will be challenges. But I also know that if we're going to make this city better, we need to work together. This is not just my project, it's our project. And together, we can build something that benefits everyone, not just the few." There was a long pause as Jack finished his speech. The silence in the room was deafening. For a moment, he wondered if he had said enough, if his words had resonated with the audience. Then, as if on cue, a hand shot up in the air. It was one of the activists, an older woman with fiery eyes, who had been speaking earlier. "Mr. Marshall," she called out, "how can we believe you when all we've seen are luxury developments pushing people out of their homes? You're talking about affordable housing, but how do we know you're not just another developer trying to line your pockets?" Jack took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. He had to address the question head-on. "I understand your skepticism," Jack said, his voice firm but compassionate. "But I want to assure you that this project is different. We're not here to make a profit at the expense of the community. We're here to invest in people who have been ignored for too long. This is a chance to create a community where everyone, from working-class families to retirees, can live and thrive. I'm committed to making sure this happens." Another hand went up, this time from a young man who looked like he'd just come from work. "What about the people who've already been displaced? How does your project help them?" Jack nodded, recognizing the importance of this question. "That's an important point," he said. "We're not just building for the future. We're working with local organizations to provide support to those who have already been displaced. We'll help with relocation and make sure that those who want to stay in the neighborhood have access to affordable housing options." For a moment, Jack wasn't sure how the crowd would respond. The room was still tense, but he could sense a shift in the air. People were listening, taking in what he had said. Then, slowly, a few voices started to speak up in agreement. The tension began to ease, and the murmurs of discontent gave way to more thoughtful questions. Jack's heart raced, but he kept his composure, answering each question with as much transparency as he could. By the end of the forum, Jack knew that he hadn't won everyone over, but he had made a difference. He had shown the city that his project wasn't just another development. It was a chance to reshape the future, to build something meaningful. Later that night, Jack and Lisa sat in the diner, reflecting on the forum. "You did great," Lisa said, her smile genuine. "I think you changed some minds today." "I hope so," Jack replied. "It's not going to be easy, but I believe we're on the right track. We have a long way to go, but today was a step in the right direction." As they finished their meal, Jack couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of hope. This wasn't just about building a building. It was about building a legacy. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them. Jack has just faced the biggest challenge of his career: convincing the city and its people that his project is more than just another luxury development. Do you think he can truly make a difference? How do you think the city will respond to his vision moving forward? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The days after the public forum were a whirlwind. Jack knew that the forum had made an impact, but he also understood that it was only the beginning. The real work was just starting. The city council had agreed to revisit the zoning laws, but that didn't mean they would automatically approve his project. In fact, Jack knew he had to keep up the momentum. He couldn't afford to sit back and hope for the best. Every morning, he woke up early, reviewed notes from the forum, and met with his team to refine their strategy. Emily was working with local advocacy groups to ensure they continued to support the project, while Lisa had set up meetings with city officials to discuss the next steps. It was clear they had made some headway, but Jack knew they couldn't take their foot off the gas. The first piece of good news came when the city council voted to move forward with a public review of the development proposals. The freeze on new projects had officially been lifted, and Jack's project was back in the running. But there were still major hurdles to clear. The council had requested more detailed plans, including specifics about affordable housing and community involvement. Weeks passed, and Jack was becoming more and more familiar with the political dance of City Hall. He had learned quickly that gaining approval wasn't just about a well-crafted proposal. It was about making connections, negotiating, and, in some cases, compromising. The council members weren't going to just take his word for it. They wanted concrete assurances. Jack spent long hours with his team, refining the project to address every concern raised during the forum. They tweaked the designs to include more affordable units, incorporated additional green spaces, and added features that would benefit the local community, like a community center, job training programs, and access to public transportation. The response from the community had also been mostly positive, especially after Jack's speech at the forum. Local businesses were starting to see the potential of the project, and many residents had reached out to express their support. But there were still vocal detractors. Activists from the opposition were relentless, organizing protests and circulating petitions. The battle was far from over. One particularly tense afternoon, Jack found himself sitting across from Mayor Elizabeth Turner in her office. She had been somewhat neutral in the early stages of the project, but with the city council now actively involved, she was going to play a pivotal role in its outcome. Jack, Mayor Turner began, her tone measured but direct. I've heard the feedback, and I'll be honest, there are still a lot of people who don't trust this project. There's concern about the environmental impact, concerns about displacement, and, frankly, about the potential for this to turn into another luxury complex. Jack leaned forward, determined not to let the doubt in her voice shake him. I understand the concerns, Mayor, and I take them seriously. That's why we've made changes to the plan. We've committed to building 40% affordable housing, expanding green spaces, and ensuring that this development will be a benefit to the community, not just a luxury for the few. I'm personally invested in making sure that happens. Mayor Turner studied him for a moment, her gaze unwavering. I can see you're committed, Jack. But commitment isn't enough in politics. You'll need more than promises. You'll need to show people that this development is truly a win for everyone, not just the investors. Jack nodded. I've already started reaching out to community groups. We've set up a partnership with local job training programs to ensure that people in the neighborhood can get work once this project is completed. We're also working with nonprofits to provide housing assistance to displaced families. This project isn't just about building a place to live, it's about creating opportunities. The mayor leaned back in her chair, considering his words carefully. It's a start, but there are still a lot of people who aren't convinced. You're going to need to work with them directly, not just talk at them. If you want my full support, you're going to need to change the narrative, Jack. Jack felt a surge of frustration, but fought to keep his composure. What do you mean by changing the narrative? I mean, she said, you need to get out there, engage with the community, and show them that you're not just another developer pushing through an agenda. You've got to prove that this project is going to make life better for the people who are already here, not just for the ones who are moving in. It wasn't the answer Jack had hoped for, but he knew she was right. He couldn't afford to let the opposition dominate the narrative. He had to do more than make promises. He had to get his hands dirty, show up at community meetings, and proved that he was genuinely invested in improving the lives of everyone in the neighborhood, not just those who would benefit from the development. The next few weeks became a blur of town hall meetings, public outreach efforts, and one-on-one conversations with concerned citizens. Jack spent more time than he ever expected talking to residents, listening to their fears and addressing their concerns. It was exhausting, and at times, it felt like progress was slow. But as he continued to engage with the community, something started to change. At a particularly tense town hall meeting, a young mother stood up and addressed Jack directly. "I'm scared, Mr. Marshall," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't want to lose my home. How can we trust you won't push us out?" Jack took a deep breath, stepping forward. "I understand your fear, and I don't want you to lose your home either. That's why we're working with local nonprofits to ensure that people who are displaced have access to affordable housing. Our project is going to include units for people like you, people who've been in this neighborhood for years. We're not here to push you out. We're here to make sure you can stay, and that you have a chance to thrive in the future." There was a long silence, and for a moment, Jack wasn't sure if the room was going to erupt in anger or silence. But then, the young mother nodded, and a few people around her gave small, cautious claps of approval. It wasn't much, but it was something. By the time the city council reconvened to discuss the project again, the tide had started to turn. The community wasn't fully behind him, but Jack had earned enough trust and goodwill to move forward. The detailed plans, his direct engagement with the residents, and the changes he had made to the development were enough to sway the votes of several key council members. The night of the vote was tense. Jack sat in the back of the council chamber, his hands clenched on the edge of the chair. He had done everything he could. Now it was up to them. When the final vote was called, Jack held his breath. "Yes," came the voice of the council chair, and one by one, the votes followed. The project had passed. Jack walked out of the council chamber that night with a feeling he hadn't expected: relief. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a victory. He had proven that a developer could listen, adapt, and make a positive impact. And now, the real work would begin. Jack has faced countless challenges to get his project approved, from skeptical activists to wary city officials. Do you think he has truly won over the community? What will the next steps be to ensure the project's success? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The approval vote was a huge win, but Jack knew that the real challenge was just beginning. The paperwork had been signed, the council had given its blessing, and the first phases of the project were ready to start. But for the first time in months, Jack realized that he wasn't just building a physical space. He was building something much more important: trust. In the days following the vote, Jack was inundated with messages from local residents, advocacy groups, and even a few vocal opponents of the project. There were congratulations, yes, but there were also lingering questions. People wanted assurances. They wanted to know how he planned to make good on his promises. This was no longer a theoretical concept. It was real, and people were watching. Jack spent his mornings at the construction site, overseeing the early stages of development. It was nothing more than a few bulldozers and construction markers at that point, but to him, it felt like the start of something monumental. By the afternoon, he would be at community meetings, answering questions, listening to concerns, and providing updates. Lisa, who had proven to be a rock throughout the process, was now handling much of the communications with the press and local organizations. The opposition wasn't going away. They were still vocal, still organizing protests, but the momentum was beginning to shift. Jack was no longer just the face of a corporation. He was becoming, in the eyes of some, a partner in the community. It was during one of these community meetings that Jack was faced with a moment that would test everything he had worked for. It was a Wednesday evening, and Jack had agreed to speak at a meeting organized by a local grassroots organization, Citizens for Affordable Living. The room was filled with local residents, some of whom had supported his project and others who had been against it from the start. Jack could see the faces of familiar activists in the crowd, people who had questioned his motives from the very beginning. He sat at the front with Emily and Lisa, preparing for a tough conversation. His plan was simple: to answer any concerns head-on and show the community how committed he was to their needs. The air in the room was thick with skepticism. A few people glanced at him with suspicion, while others avoided eye contact altogether. But Jack wasn't deterred. He'd been here before. The meeting began with a few members of the organization giving updates about their ongoing campaigns and efforts to advocate for affordable housing. Then, the floor was open to questions. A woman in her late 50s stood up, her expression serious. She had short gray hair and wore an apron as if she had just come from the kitchen. She looked like someone who had lived in the neighborhood for a long time, someone who had seen the changes the city had gone through in the past few years. "Mr. Marshall," she said, her voice firm but not unfriendly, "you've told us about your plans for affordable housing, but how do you expect us to believe you when developers like you have come in before and pushed us out? We've been hearing the same promises for years. We're tired of waiting for something that never comes." Jack nodded, his heart racing, but his voice steady. "I understand your frustration," he said, making sure to make eye contact with her. "Believe me, I don't take these concerns lightly. That's why, from day one, I've committed to working alongside people like you to ensure that this development is done right. Our affordable housing component isn't just a percentage of units, it's a central part of the project. We've also committed to working with local organizations to provide assistance to families who've been displaced, and we're making sure the design of this development includes spaces where local businesses can thrive, not just the wealthy. We're not here to take anything from you. We're here to build something that benefits everyone." The woman paused, considering his words. The room was silent as people waited for her response. After a long moment, she nodded, though not fully convinced. "I'll believe it when I see it," she said, then sat down. Jack could feel the eyes of the room on him, waiting for him to falter. But he didn't. He answered every question that came his way, no matter how tough or pointed. Some questions were easy to address, while others were more complex. But Jack remained patient, determined to prove that this wasn't just another corporate project, it was a community initiative. He wasn't just building structures, he was building relationships. As the weeks passed, Jack's efforts to build trust continued. He and his team worked tirelessly, attending community meetings, holding open forums, and sitting down with local leaders. He began to understand that this project was more than just about bricks and mortar. It was about healing a community that had been torn apart by inequality, neglect, and fear of change. Jack didn't just want to be seen as a developer. He wanted to be seen as someone who cared about the future of the people who had lived in the city long before he'd arrived. And to do that, he knew he had to keep delivering on his promises, even when it was hard. One day, as Jack was walking through the construction site, Lisa approached him with some unexpected news. "We've got a breakthrough," she said, her face lit up with a rare smile. "We've got a group of local businesses who are willing to partner with us on the project. They're excited about the job training programs we've proposed, and they want to help with recruitment." Jack raised an eyebrow. "That's huge. Which businesses?" "Some of the local shops on Oak Street. You know, the ones that have been here forever. They want to make sure that the new development isn't just another chain store wasteland. They're willing to invest in the neighborhood." Jack's heart lifted. This was exactly the kind of collaboration he had been hoping for. If local businesses were willing to join forces, it would show the community that the project was about their future, not just the future of outsiders. "That's incredible," Jack said, the weight on his shoulders easing for the first time in a while. "Let's make sure they're involved every step of the way." Later that evening, Jack sat at his desk, reviewing the latest community feedback reports. The response was mixed, but the tide was turning. The number of supporters had increased, and the public perception of the project was becoming more positive. But Jack knew better than to get complacent. He had learned the hard way that change didn't happen overnight, and trust couldn't be won with a single speech or gesture. It would take time, maybe years, to fully prove that he was different from the developers who had come before him. But for the first time in months, Jack felt like he was on the right path. As the months passed, the project's development continued to move forward, slowly but steadily. The first foundations had been laid, and workers began erecting the steel skeleton of what would one day be the new housing complex. The site was bustling with activity, and Jack felt a sense of accomplishment every time he walked past it. But, as much as he wanted to feel victorious, he knew that his real test wasn't going to be found in the steel beams or concrete foundations. It would be in the hearts and minds of the people who lived here, the people who had lived through the struggles, who had seen too many promises come and go without any real change. Jack had invested so much of his energy into making this project work, not just financially, but emotionally. He had promised himself that this development wouldn't be like all the others. He wasn't just building a place for people to live. He was building a sense of belonging, a foundation for a new chapter in their community. But promises were fragile things, especially when the cracks started to show. One afternoon, Jack received an urgent call from Emily. Her voice was tight, almost strained, as she spoke. "Jack, you need to come down here. There's been a situation with one of the community groups we've been working with. It's bad." Jack didn't hesitate. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. By the time he arrived at the community center where Emily had arranged the meeting, the atmosphere was tense. A small group of local residents, along with several community organizers, had gathered in the cramped room, their faces set in hard lines. Emily stood in the corner, speaking quietly with one of the organizers, while the rest of the group murmured amongst themselves. When Jack entered, all eyes turned to him. The room fell silent. One of the leaders, a tall woman in her 40s with short, curly hair, stepped forward. Her name was Carla, and she had been one of the most vocal advocates for affordable housing from the beginning. Jack had respected her passion and determination. But now, as she stood in front of him, her eyes were full of frustration. "Jack, we need to talk," Carla said, her voice cutting through the tension. "We've been hearing rumors about changes to the project. We're hearing that the percentage of affordable housing has been reduced. Is that true?" Jack felt a sharp pang in his chest. This was the last thing he needed right now. "No, Carla. I swear, there's been no reduction in affordable units. We're still on track to meet the 40% we promised. The plans haven't changed." Carla shook her head, her expression a mix of disbelief and frustration. "Then why are we hearing that some of the low-income housing is being pushed to the outskirts of the development? That's not what we agreed on, Jack. You're putting people in the least desirable areas of the project, far away from the amenities, far away from the community center, and from any of the businesses we've been fighting for." Jack felt the blood drain from his face. This was a major issue. If this was true, it would destroy everything they had worked for. He could feel the eyes of the room on him, waiting for him to respond, for him to reassure them that this was some kind of mistake. He took a deep breath and looked Carla in the eye. "I don't know where this information is coming from, but I assure you, it's not true. I haven't made any changes to the housing layout without consulting everyone involved. Let's get to the bottom of this. I'm going to review the plans myself and make sure everything is in order. You have my word." Carla didn't look convinced, but she nodded. "You'd better. Because if you're lying to us, Jack, there's no coming back from that. This neighborhood can't afford another broken promise." The word stung. Jack knew she wasn't speaking out of anger, but out of fear. A fear he understood all too well. The fear that after all this time, after all their hard work, they would once again be left behind. It was a fear he had shared many times over the past months, but now he realized that the stakes were higher than ever. The next few days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and frantic conversations with his team. Jack immediately ordered a full review of the housing layout to ensure that nothing had changed without his knowledge. Emily was on the phone with the architect, Lisa was organizing a sit-down with community leaders, and Jack was poring over blueprints and correspondence from the past few months. The more he dug into it, the more troubling it became. It turned out that the discrepancy wasn't a deliberate change. It was a misunderstanding. A miscommunication between the development team and the architects had led to a draft that showed the low-income units being placed in the furthest corners of the development, away from the community spaces and businesses. The layout was not final, but the perception of it had already taken root. Jack knew that the damage had been done. It didn't matter if the plans weren't final. What mattered was how the community had interpreted it. He called a meeting with his team and made a decision that, at the time, felt like a gut punch. "We need to fix this, and we need to fix it fast. We're going to release an updated plan, one that clearly shows the affordable housing near the center of the development, close to the amenities and businesses we promised. And we're going to hold a public meeting to walk everyone through the changes." Emily and Lisa exchanged glances, but neither of them objected. They knew Jack was right. The transparency and the trust were more important now than ever. The following evening, Jack and his team set up a public meeting at the community center. The room was packed, and the mood was cautious. There was no longer any blind optimism. The residents who had once been hopeful now sat with crossed arms and skeptical expressions. Carla was there, too. Her eyes narrowed. Jack stepped up to the front of the room, holding a set of revised blueprints in his hands. He could feel the weight of the room on him, the eyes of the community fixed on his every word. This was the moment. This would decide everything. "I want to start by apologizing," Jack said, his voice steady but sincere. "I understand that there's been confusion about the layout of the affordable housing in this project, and I take full responsibility for that. There was a mistake made, a miscommunication between our team and the architects. But I'm here to show you that we are committed to placing the low-income housing in a central location, close to the businesses, community spaces, and the amenities we've promised. This development is for everyone, and that includes the families who need affordable housing the most." He paused, watching the room carefully. Carla stood up, her arms still crossed, but her expression had softened slightly. "I know this doesn't erase the doubt that's been planted," Jack continued, "but I ask you to give us a chance to prove that we're not just building a development, we're building a community. One that works for everyone." Jack held up the new blueprints for the room to see. The layout had been updated, and the affordable housing was now placed in the heart of the development, right next to the community center and the local businesses. There was a long silence as the residents studied the plans. Jack could feel the tension building, but this time it wasn't hostile. It was a mix of hope and uncertainty. After what felt like an eternity, Carla stood up again. "All right, Jack. This looks like progress. But you're right. It's not enough to just show us a piece of paper. You need to prove it, and we'll be watching." Jack nodded, grateful for her response. "I wouldn't expect anything less." As the meeting came to a close, Jack knew that the true test was far from over. The community still had their doubts, and the road ahead would be full of obstacles. But for the first time in months, he felt a flicker of hope, a small, fragile light that the project might just be able to live up to its promises after all. The community has faced another setback, but Jack is doing everything he can to make things right. Do you think this was the right approach to rebuild trust? How do you think the residents will respond moving forward? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The tension in the air had never been thicker. Jack had done everything he could to show the community that the development project was still on track and that the affordable housing units would be placed where they were needed most. The revised plans had been met with cautious optimism, but Jack knew that words alone wouldn't be enough to rebuild the trust that had been fractured. The coming months would be critical. The weeks following the public meeting were filled with a strange mix of progress and setbacks. On the one hand, Jack had made some headway with the community, and several key local businesses were beginning to sign on, committing to be part of the development's retail space. The job training programs were starting to take shape, and the city council had given their approval for the first phase of construction to move forward. But on the other hand, the opposition wasn't going away. If anything, their voices were growing louder. A few vocal leaders from the local activist groups had started to organize protests, accusing Jack and his team of failing to truly address the needs of the people. Their message was clear. Jack's promises were hollow until they saw the results. It was frustrating. Jack had always known that change was hard. He had known that this project would be controversial. But the constant pushback, the second-guessing, the accusations, it was taking a toll on him. One cold Tuesday morning, as Jack sipped his coffee in his office, Lisa walked in, holding a thick stack of papers. She didn't look happy. "What's going on?" Jack asked, his voice cautious. "It's the protesters again," Lisa said, dropping the papers onto his desk. "They've just launched a new petition. They're claiming that even with the affordable housing components we've agreed on, the project will still displace more people than it helps. They've got signatures from over 1,000 people already, Jack. And they're planning another protest in front of City Hall next week." Jack ran his hand through his hair. "I don't know how much more of this I can take, Lisa. I feel like we're doing everything right, but it's never enough. We've made compromises. We've listened, but they just won't stop." Lisa sat down across from him. "You knew this was going to be hard. But the thing is, Jack, You're not in this alone. There are people who believe in this project, people who are going to benefit from it. You just need to keep pushing forward. Show them with action, not just words. Jack nodded, but the weight of the situation still pressed heavily on him. Every time he took a step forward, it felt like the ground shifted beneath him, making him feel like he was falling back. By that weekend, Jack's resolve was being tested like never before. He was scheduled to attend a meeting with Carla and several other community leaders at the local church to discuss new developments, but when he arrived, he was met with a chill in the air. Carla was there, but her demeanor was guarded. She greeted Jack with a nod, but there was none of the warmth that had been present in their earlier meetings. "Jack," Carla began, "we need to talk." Jack sat down across from her. "I'm listening." "We've been hearing more and more complaints from the people," she said, her voice low. "It's not just about the layout anymore. It's about the timeline. People are worried this project is going to drag on for years before they see any real change. Some are even saying that the affordable units might not be ready until the rest of the development is finished." "That's not what you promised, Jack." Jack felt his stomach twist. "That's not true. We've always said that the affordable housing units would be built first, so people could start moving in as soon as possible. I've never said otherwise." Carla looked at him, her expression hard. "The timeline is slipping. You promised people that they would be able to see results quickly. But now, people are starting to lose hope. The longer this drags on, the harder it's going to be to convince them that you're not just another developer with empty promises." Jack clenched his jaw. He had always known that timelines were a challenge, especially with a project this complex. But he had made a promise to the people, and he wasn't about to let it fall apart now. "I'll get on it, Carla," Jack said firmly. "I'll have an updated timeline by the end of the week, and I'll make sure that affordable housing is the first priority, as promised. I'll show you that I'm not just talking the talk. We'll deliver." Carla gave him a short nod, though her skepticism was evident. "You'd better. Because if we lose the community's trust, there's no coming back from that." Jack left the meeting feeling more pressure than he had ever felt before. He couldn't afford another setback. If the timeline slipped any further, or if people started to doubt his commitment, the entire project could unravel. There was no way to go back. The stakes had never been higher. He spent the next few days with his team, drafting an updated timeline that would ensure the affordable units were prioritized. It wasn't easy, but Jack knew that this was the only way forward. He was starting to understand the enormity of what he had promised, and the gravity of delivering on those promises. By Thursday, Jack had sent the updated timeline to Carla and the rest of the community leaders, along with a detailed breakdown of how the affordable housing units would be built first, followed by the rest of the development. He also announced a series of public meetings where he would walk residents through the updated plans, ensuring full transparency. It was a gamble. The protesters weren't going to go away, but Jack was hoping that this show of commitment would help win over some of the community's remaining skeptics. He knew it wasn't going to be enough to change everyone's mind, but if he could prove that he was listening, that he was acting on their concerns, it might be enough to keep the momentum going. On the evening of the first public meeting, Jack felt an odd sense of calm. There were still protesters outside, holding signs and chanting slogans, but Jack wasn't focused on them. He was focused on the faces in the crowd inside. People who were willing to listen, willing to engage with him and his team. People who still had hope, who still believed that this project could be the change they'd been waiting for. As Jack took the stage, he felt the eyes of the room on him once more. This was his moment. It was time to show them what they'd been waiting for. "I know you've had your doubts," Jack began, his voice steady. "And I know I've made mistakes along the way. But I'm here to tell you that this project is not just about buildings and money. It's about you. It's about this community. And we are going to build it together." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We are going to build a place where everyone, regardless of income, has the opportunity to thrive. And we're going to do it quickly. The affordable housing units are our priority, and I'm going to make sure they're built first. I'm here to make sure that you are part of this change, and I will not let you down." The room was quiet, but Jack could see a shift in the faces around him. The skepticism was still there, but for the first time in a long while, there was a glimmer of something else. Hope. The weeks following Jack's public meeting felt like a slow burn. The protests outside City Hall had continued, though they were smaller now. The angry chants and picket signs still filled the air, but inside the meeting rooms and community centers, things were beginning to shift. Jack had done everything he promised. He had taken the feedback seriously, revised the plans, and even adjusted the project's timeline to ensure the affordable housing units were prioritized. Yet, despite these changes, he knew that it wasn't enough to simply meet their expectations. He needed to prove that this project wasn't just another hollow promise in a long list of failed attempts. But the reality of the situation was clear. The community was still watching him closely. Each step forward felt precarious, as if one wrong move could shatter the fragile trust he had spent months trying to rebuild. Jack had to keep pushing, but he also had to be careful not to let the pressure overwhelm him. It was a Tuesday morning when Jack received a call that would change everything. "Jack," Lisa's voice crackled over the line. "You're going to want to come down here. The press is here, and they're asking about the new changes to the project. They've got a lot of questions about the timeline and how we're addressing the community's concerns." Jack rubbed his temples, feeling a familiar headache brewing. "Tell them I'll be there in an hour." As he arrived at the construction site, he could see the crowd of reporters milling around, their cameras pointed in every direction, eager to catch any new angle. The stakes were higher than ever. One misstep in the media, and the entire project could be thrown into jeopardy. Jack walked toward the cluster of journalists, adjusting his coat against the chill in the air. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, the weight of their questions hanging like a storm cloud. But he was ready. This was his moment to show that he had nothing to hide, that he was committed to the community's vision. The first reporter to approach him was an older man with a sharp look in his eye. "Mr. Harris," he said, holding up a microphone, "the community has had its doubts about your project from the start, and there have been significant protests, including a recent petition against your timeline. How do you respond to the criticism that your project may be pushing people out of their homes before the affordable housing is even completed?" Jack took a deep breath. This was the tough question, the one that could make or break everything. He looked the reporter directly in the eyes and spoke with confidence. "The affordable housing units are being built first, as I promised. The community's concerns are valid, and we've worked hard to adjust our timeline to prioritize the residents who need it the most. This project is not just about bricks and mortar, it's about creating a community. And I'm committed to making sure that the people who need affordable housing the most will have access to it right away, not years down the road." The reporter nodded but didn't let up. "And how do you respond to critics who say you're rushing this project for profit and not for the people?" Jack felt his pulse quicken, but he kept his tone steady. "I understand the skepticism, and frankly, I'd be skeptical too if I were in their shoes. But I'm here, talking to you today, because I care about this project. I care about the people who live in this neighborhood. I've invested time, energy, and resources into this because I believe in what it can do. The profits will come, yes, but that's not my primary goal. My goal is to build something that lasts, something that changes lives. That's why I'm still here, working every day to ensure that happens." The questions continued, some easier, some more challenging. Jack answered each one with patience, trying to project calm confidence. He knew that the press was looking for cracks, moments of uncertainty they could latch onto. But today, Jack wasn't giving them that opportunity. He wasn't going to let this moment slip away. As the press conference drew to a close, one of the reporters asked a final question that caught Jack off guard. "Mr. Harris," the reporter said, his voice cutting through the noise, "you've talked a lot about your commitment to affordable housing, but there are people in this community who say you don't understand their struggles. You don't know what it's like to be without a home or to watch your neighbors get displaced. How can you relate to them?" Jack hesitated. It was a fair question, and one he hadn't fully prepared for. He wasn't from this neighborhood. He hadn't lived through the hardships the residents had. How could he possibly understand their pain? But then something inside him clicked. He wasn't going to try to pretend he had all the answers. He wasn't going to sugarcoat things. Instead, he looked directly at the reporter and spoke from the heart. "You're right," Jack said quietly. "I don't know what it's like to live without a home. I don't know what it's like to worry about where you'll sleep tonight or how you'll feed your family tomorrow. But I do know what it's like to feel responsible for something big, something that matters. And that's why I'm here. To show that we can build something better. I don't have all the answers, but I'm listening. I'm here, and I'm committed to getting this right. I will fight for this community, because that's what it deserves. There was a brief moment of silence, and then, for the first time in a long while, Jack felt the weight of the room lift. It wasn't gone entirely, but the skepticism was starting to melt away. He had spoken with honesty, with vulnerability, and it had resonated with the people in front of him. It felt like a turning point, a small but significant shift in how the community was viewing him and the project. As Jack walked away from the press conference, he felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't a complete victory, not yet. There would still be challenges ahead, still protests, still doubts. But today, for the first time in months, Jack felt like he had turned a corner. He had proven to the community, to the press, and to himself that he wasn't just some developer trying to make a quick profit. He was a man who believed in the power of change, a man who was willing to stand by his word, even when things were tough. That evening, as he sat in his office, Jack couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led him to this point. The road had been long, filled with obstacles and setbacks. But as he looked out at the city skyline, Jack realized that he wasn't just building a housing complex. He was building something much bigger, a future for people who had been forgotten, a chance at a new beginning. And, for the first time in a long time, Jack felt like maybe, just maybe, it was all going to work out. The air was thick with anticipation. Jack had worked tirelessly over the past few months, pushing through each obstacle, each moment of doubt, each protest. The road to this point had been filled with heartache, struggle, and small victories. He had fought for the project, for the community, for the promise of a better future. But now, as the final phase of the project was set to begin, the hardest test of all loomed ahead. Whether the promises he had made would stand up to the reality of what needed to be done. It was a crisp fall morning when Jack stood at the construction site, the skyline of the city sprawling out in front of him. The first phase of the development was nearly complete, and the affordable housing units were starting to take shape. It had been a long journey, and he could feel the weight of it all pressing down on him. The community had rallied behind him, but there was still work to be done. There were still skeptics, still protesters, still those who believed that this project would fail. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Carla, the community leader who had been his ally throughout the project. "Carla, we need to talk. There's something happening today that you need to know about." Jack's heart skipped a beat. The last few weeks had been smooth, relatively speaking, but something about Carla's message told him that this wasn't going to be good news. He quickly texted her back, asking where and when. The response came quickly: "Meet me at the site. We need to sort this out before the press gets involved." Jack's stomach tightened as he made his way to the site. He knew that every decision now would be scrutinized. One wrong move, and the whole project could come crashing down. When he arrived, Carla was waiting for him at the entrance to the construction site. Her expression was grim, and there was an edge of urgency in her voice as she spoke. "Jack, we've got a serious problem," she said, her eyes scanning the area as if she were expecting trouble. "The protesters, well, they've gotten more organized. They're planning a massive rally right here, at the heart of the development, and they've been talking about holding a sit-in. They've even reached out to the media, saying they won't leave until they get guarantees that the affordable housing will be finished on time." Jack's chest tightened. He had known that there would always be resistance, but this felt different. This felt like the culmination of everything: the anger, the frustration, the fear. They were no longer just voices of dissent. They were a united front, pushing for something more than just change. They were demanding accountability. "What are they asking for, exactly?" Jack asked, his voice steady despite the growing anxiety inside him. Carla sighed, rubbing her temples. "They're not just demanding affordable housing anymore. They want transparency. They want to know that you're not going to cut corners or backtrack on your promises. And they want to see a real, tangible commitment to the people who are going to be displaced. They're asking for guarantees on the timeline, real assurances that the community will not be forgotten once the construction is finished." Jack stood in silence for a moment, absorbing what Carla was saying. This was more than just a protest now, it was a movement. And if he didn't handle this right, it could undo everything he had worked for. I've always been honest with them, Jack said, his voice quieter now. I've never made promises I can't keep. But maybe I haven't done enough to show them that I mean it. Maybe they're right to question me. Carla put a hand on his shoulder, her tone softening. It's not too late, Jack, but you have to show them. You have to prove to them that you're not like the others. That this is a project for the people, not for profit. You're not just selling them a dream. You're making it real. Jack nodded. He understood now. The time for words was over. This was about action, about showing up and doing what needed to be done, even if it meant making difficult decisions. That afternoon, Jack stood before the crowd of protesters. The media had gathered, cameras trained on him, waiting for him to speak. He had no script, no prepared speech. What he was about to say had to come from the heart. He couldn't afford to sound like just another politician or developer giving empty assurances. The crowd murmured as he stepped up to the podium, but when Jack raised his hand for silence, it fell. I know I've made mistakes, he began, his voice carrying across the crowd. I know that I've promised things that people didn't believe would happen. And I know that there are those of you who still think this project is just about profit, about developers coming in and pushing you out. He paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd. There were older people, young families, activists, local business owners, people from every walk of life. But they all had one thing in common. They were tired. Tired of being told that things would change, only to see nothing happen. But let me be clear about one thing, Jack continued, his voice firm. I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here because I believe in this project. I believe in this community. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that this development serves the people it was meant to serve. I promised affordable housing would come first, and I'm making sure that happens. I've asked my team to prioritize it above all else. And if I don't keep that promise, you have every right to hold me accountable. The crowd remained quiet, their eyes fixed on him. Jack could feel the weight of their scrutiny, but he stood firm, speaking from a place of honesty. I'm not asking you to trust me based on my words, Jack said, his gaze sweeping the crowd. I'm asking you to watch what I do. I'm asking you to judge me by the results. And I'm going to deliver. You'll see the affordable housing units open before the rest of the development. I will not let you down, but I need your support. We can only build a better future together. As Jack finished speaking, there was a long silence. The protesters, the media, and even the community leaders who had been skeptical stood still, weighing his words. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the crowd began to soften. The murmurs turned into applause, not loud, but steady. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He had done it. He had shown them he wasn't just another developer with empty promises. He had laid himself bare, and it had resonated. Weeks later, the affordable housing units opened on time. Jack's team had worked tirelessly, meeting the new deadlines and delivering on their promises. The project had been built with the community in mind, and for the first time in a long while, Jack felt like the city was beginning to heal. The protests had died down, but the community's watchful eye remained. Jack knew that his work was far from over. There would always be more to do, more challenges to face. But for the first time, he felt like he had earned the trust of the people he had promised to serve. As he looked out over the now completed development, Jack couldn't help but smile. This was just the beginning. Jack's journey has been filled with challenges, but he managed to turn the tide with his honesty and commitment to the community. Do you think he's truly earned the trust of the people? What do you think he should focus on next to ensure the project continues to succeed? Share your thoughts in the comments below.